For the record, I'm District 2, the towns of Ware and Deering, and good morning to members of the committee. You have in front of you an amendment which replaces the entire bill. The amendment, it does the same thing as the original bill, but it attempts to clarify things. In the process of this passing the House, I was contacted by Commissioner Beardmore and Commissioner Quirm on behalf of a whole group of commissioners who had problems with the bill as it came out of the House. I had subsequent meetings with Assistant Commissioner of Safety Bailey, Deputy Attorney General Ann Rice, and several others whose names, I'm sorry, I apologize for them, I've forgotten at the moment. But we had a number of meetings to try to flesh this out a bit more, and the amendment that you see before you is a result of that. I'm not suggesting that the commissioners have agreed to it. Indeed, they do not. But I am saying that the changes that you see before you were a result of my several meetings with the commissioners and their representatives. The bill, what the bill does is set forth very succinctly in plain English on lines 8 through 11 on the first page. The basic purpose of the bill is to say that personal data about New Hampshire residents cannot be passed on to the federal government without the legislature making a policy decision that that's a good idea. There is an exception for current practice, whether it's by statute, administrative rule, or just agency practice. If that is being done prior to July 1st, 2017, then that may continue unabated. There's a definition of what personal data is, starting on lines 23. On page 1, there are exceptions, of which I just mentioned several, starting on page 2. It doesn't apply on line 5, where there's a state statute or administrative rule that allows it, or line 6, there's an administrative practice in effect on or before July 1st. And then line 7 through 9 is basically an emergency exception. My understanding is that the agencies are still dissatisfied with this because it's vague. And you will hear from them testifying, I think, as to why it's vague. I'm more than willing to work with them to try to clarify where there may be issues. For example, I was just speaking with the Department of Insurance Assistant Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, Mr. Feldwebel, and he was giving me an example. Well, what happens in a situation where we're already participating, let's say, in some Medicaid program, and the federal government expands Medicaid in some way? Does the statute, which talks about Medicaid, but not the expansion of Medicaid, require the department to go back to the legislature for approval to participate and send information to the federal government? Or is the legislature's decision to participate in Medicaid, but not the expansion, sufficient? And I understand that concern, and that can be addressed. What I would hope this committee would do would be to support the concept that it's the legislature that makes a policy as to what personal information goes to the federal government, rather than administrative agencies in carrying out their particular responsibilities. With that, Madam Chairman, I'd be pleased to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions? Senator Reagan.
Good morning, Representative Cruz.
Good morning.
I'm curious as to what prompted this.
Unlike a number of other privacy bills which I've introduced, there is no particular incident or issue that prompted this. There is no, quote, dead body in the middle of the road, quote. This is a basic concern that I have, that the federal government is acquiring all sorts of information about American citizens, and in particular, among others, New Hampshire citizens, in the course of its daily operations with different programs. And I'm concerned that federal databases will include information about New Hampshire residents without the legislature saying the consequences of that are worth the benefit to New Hampshire of whatever program it is that requires those federal databases to be established.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
Is it Mr. Hill? The chair will call Mr. Hill. No, I'll get it right someday.
Hey, you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Alex Feldwebel. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Insurance Department, and I've been asked to present the letter on behalf of the 14 commissioners who signed it and contributed to its composition. We have hard copies here, and I think you all received it by email. The letter asks that the bill be re-referred or converted to a study committee. And you will hear from a number of representatives from different agencies today, I believe, about specific examples of the kinds of negative effects that this bill would have. And the letter contains an appendix that also gives specific examples. So what I'd like to do is just convey in general terms the nature of our concern about the bill and reasons why we have difficulty in our conversations and in coming to agreement about a mandatory language. Primarily, the concern is that the bill interfere with important funding and regulatory cooperation that New Hampshire receives from the federal government. There are a number of programs across the state where the condition of receiving federal funds, agencies are required to share information. There's also significant information sharing that needs to go on in the enforcement of state and federal criminal laws, and I think you'll hear about that from other witnesses. For the insurance department, we're concerned about regulatory enforcement, and there are a number of instances in which we cooperate with federal agencies and employees at the U.S. Attorney's Office, for example, in the prosecution of insurance fraud. The reason that the bill causes concern about these federal funding and cooperative enforcement efforts is that its language is very broad. It uses the notion of its prohibitory language is very broad. So it prohibits agencies from enabling or facilitating the subsequent collection of any personal data. So it's not just the concept of agencies can't share data, but they can't enable or facilitate. That makes it very broad. And then the definition of personal data that you'll see in the amendment is also very broad. It includes a person's name, for example. So that raises concerns about an agency's obligation to respond to 91A requests, for example. Does our obligation under 91A conflict with this broad definition of personal data? I just want to take another minute to describe our efforts to come up with some kind of solution that makes an accommodation for these existing practices on which we rely for federal funding and for successful enforcement and criminal prosecution. The amendment does contain the concept that anything that agencies are doing today would be okay and could continue, but any future new sharing of information would be prohibited. And in the discussion that has taken place between different agencies, there's a great deal of concern about that as well. It doesn't directly address a lot of the concern we have, but it's a vague idea. And I think Representative Kirk was already expressing the example that I would use. The insurance department today shares some information with CMS in its effort to prosecute, to enforce the unfair trade insurance trade practices laws against entities that are selling net sub policies that in a way that might harm consumers. So that is arguably an existing practice, but if Medicare evolves and, for example, develops Medicare Part D for long-term care and there are products sold in association with that, is that a new sharing of information or is it an existing practice? I think that's big and more work needs to be done. So our request is that we give this more time by redeferring it and take some time to look at the ways in which state agencies currently share information with the federal government and figure out, what policy, what is appropriate to address the policy decision about new forms of sharing. Then our message is just that it's not that simple, and it would take some time to work that out.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Ann Rice.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Ann Rice, I'm the Deputy Attorney General. If you wouldn't mind, I would ask if we could have Joseph Ebert, Lieutenant. Joseph Ebert,
That's fine. Just make sure, before you speak, that you recognize yourself for the record.
My name is Joe Ebert. I'm a lieutenant with the state police, and I'm also the director of the New Hampshire Information Analysis.
And Lieutenant Ebert and I are here as representing the law enforcement community and the concerns that we have about this bill. But before I get to that, I'd also like to say that I'm also here appearing as legal counsel for all state agencies in New Hampshire. We have to provide legal advice to every single agency, and with the language of this bill, it would be very difficult to advise our client agencies about what this really prohibits. And I think that what we might have to do, I think that we would have to tell people that they have to act with caution and simply not provide information, which I'm not sure is where we want to be. But let me give you an example. If the definition of personal data includes one or more pieces of information when considered in context are sufficient to identify a specific individual, which could include me. While we have seemingly innocuous pieces of information that we may need to share or want to share with the federal government, we don't have any control over the context in which it's used in the federal government. And so I can't advise and say these two pieces of information, when if you are sharing these with the federal government, that they will not be sufficient to allow the federal government to identify someone. So we're working from a backdrop that we don't have any control over, and that's a very difficult thing to try and advise the client. So I think as a agency counsel, I would say this bill is very vague, and we would ask, we're certainly willing to work with Representative Kirk. We didn't meet with him, as we've said before, to see if we can come up with something that's a workable solution, but it's very vague. The other concern is as a law enforcement agency. As you know, it is critical now that we work very closely with the feds. Our crimes do not stay at state boundaries. We need to work with all of our partners, both other states and the federal government. And one of the ongoing examples that I'd like to give you that could be prevented right now under this statute is information about carfentanil, which was just discovered in New Hampshire. That's not something that was created in New Hampshire. We need to communicate with all of our fellow law enforcement agencies, both the feds and our surrounding states, to try and find out where this drug is coming from. Is that a current administrative practice? The practice of communicating with law enforcement agencies is carfentanil? I don't know. I think that we need to be careful about that. So I have some concerns about whether this bill would limit those sorts of things. The think Lieutenant Eden, as the director of IAP, has a lot of other examples of the kinds of things that could be prevented or we have concerns about.
So I think the way that I would speak to it is, after meeting with the Representative Kirk, I think some of my concerns were allayed. However, I still have deep concerns over the thought that there would be some type of information that would be requested from us that we would be prohibited from sharing in the future. And it's very difficult to know what that information would be, because I can't predict future needs or future requests, much like the carfentanil issue that has cropped up in the last couple of weeks. So that would be my concern, and what clearly I would not want to find myself in a position of doing is trying to figure out what past practice was and see if that's applicable to a current situation. It would be much, at least from my perspective, it would be much easier if we had just a defined route of what exactly it is that we could or could not do. Whereas arguing past practice, I think, gets into some subjective matter as to whether or not something we did in the past was, in fact, similar enough to something that we're being requested in the future to do.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Reagan?
I mean, I would object to the wholesale transfer of information that's in the possession of the New Hampshire Department to anybody.
Senator Reagan, if I could speak to that, I do think that it would be much easier to look at this on a programmatic level than on an individual basis. You know, if there are things that are being done where we are compiling data and providing it to the federal government on a regular basis, that's more easily defined, and I think that is addressed more in our statutes. Where I see the problem, and I can't speak for all agencies on this, but where I see the problem, particularly with law enforcement, is that we're dealing with new types of issues all the time, and that we're not defined by administrative practice. All we have is we have the police power to work with our federal government. So one of the ways that I might suggest narrowing this bill is talking about somehow identifying what is being shared programmatically, compilation of data, and saying this is a line in the sand and it's not something that we want to move beyond. But right now we don't have any baseline to judge from.
Okay, are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you both for your
Thank you.
testimony.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the chair will call Cassie Keen. Good morning, and this is Cassie Keen and Vicki Firm. So again, just make sure to identify yourselves for the record.
Good morning, I'm Commissioner Vicki Clear of the Department of Administrative Services. I'm Cassie Keen, I'm also with Administrative Services, and I serve as the Director of Risk and Benefits, and I'll be talking about the impact of this bill to benefits. And I would just very quickly say that the Department of Administrative Services is more than willing to work on this bill, and certainly we do not want to be sharing information in the federal government that's not absolutely necessary. And so I think they heard a testimony very much to that effect, and I am going to turn it over to Kathy to give an example of how it might affect our agency. Thank you. I'm going to look to retiree health and prescription drug Medicare subsidies that we receive in retiree health for an example for you. In 2015, we moved from one form of Medicare reimbursement to the state, and that reimbursement occurs because we're providing drug coverage, and so Medicare subsidizes some of that coverage with different kinds of subsidies. We moved from one kind of coverage called retiree drug subsidy to something called employer group waiver plan. And we did it in 2015 under the Commissioner's authority to administer the retiree health benefit plan. And we did it because we were maximizing federal revenue. we were increasing the amount of revenue coming into the retiree health benefit plan, and that provides stability of benefits. We're complying with federal law, complying with state law, complying with HIPAA, but the kinds of fields of information that we provide in a data exchange are name, date of birth, social security, and a Medicare ID number. And our biggest point is that we need to be very nimble when changes happen at the federal level to be able to continue to maximize that federal revenue. If the federal law changes, we need to move from one program to the next, so that we're bringing in the revenue that helps support retiree health benefits. In 2016, the revenue I'm talking about is $4.5 million. That is so significant to our retirees. So I think that provides an example of why we're concerned about this bill and the idea that it would only apply to what is in place today.
And I do want to add that we are so careful about the data that we do share with all kinds of regulations and HIPAA regulations, particularly in health information. So again, it's not that we want to share any additional information, but the information that we need to share in order to provide what we need for the retirees is definitely what we do.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair will call Darrell Perry.
Thank you. For the record, Darrell Perry, CEO of Prohibiting LLC. And I'm not going to speak to the amendment, just because I need more time to absorb everything that is there. I would not oppose the idea of a study committee for that. I'm going to speak to the bill as introduced and as passed by the House. And I believe the intent, even though Representative Kirk said that there was not anything that was necessarily the impetus, I found similar wording from the 10th Amendment Center as what they call the 4th Amendment Protection Act. And they have the intent as to make sure that state and local governments are not assisting the feds in violating your rights. We learned from the Snowden revelations in 2013 that the NSA is quite possibly recording everything that you do online. We learned recently from the Vault 7 leaks that the CIA can wind up collecting information against you without a valid warrant of any kind, even from the FISA court. And there's a doctrine that's been around since 1842 called the anti-commandeering doctrine, meaning that the federal government cannot force a state or local government to carry out federal law. The federal government cannot force a state or local government to violate the rights of the people that live in that state. So hugely in favor of the bill as introduced. Again, would not oppose the study committee on the amendment, but I'm not going to speak on that, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perry. Are there any questions? Mr. Perry? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Christopher Wade.